So how do narcissists get away with so much? They devalue you, they hurt you, they lie to you, they push you away from things that are important to you and which matter to you. Narcissists are really good at making you feel very small, making you feel like crap. And when you call them out on it, or try to call them out, or try to have a conversation, they suddenly play the role of victim. And they play the role of victim so well, you feel that they're untouchable. In a sense, you can't really hold them accountable for anything because they're all of a sudden in this victim mindset. So they swap between perpetrator and victim, and it can be very confusing and irritating as well. But how do they do that? And how do they just manage to pull that off in a way that actually works? You see, narcissists and all other abusers, anyone who's a narcissist or very narcissistic or very high in these kind of like volatile, abusive traits, which you see in cluster B personalities, for instance, they were all victims themselves, or for the most part, people who are very abusive, they were victims themselves at some point, usually by a caregiver who didn't take care of them, who abused them, and who caused some form of trauma, which translated into these maladaptive coping mechanisms which these people have, which are the actual cluster B narcissistic disorder. And narcissists, for instance, they're very good at making people feel bad. They're very good at projecting their negativity, their toxicity onto others. And when people, especially those closest to them, try to hold them accountable for everything, they can very easily switch into this victim mindset where their energy, their way of speaking, their demeanor, everything all of a sudden, it's like they're sulking. All of a sudden, you see them as a victim. Sometimes they're tearful even. And they'll bring up past events. They'll mention things that kind of reinforce that victim status, and they get you to feel sorry for them. Just, it could be at a time when you want to have a conversation about them to set the score straight about their ways, and you're trying to have a heart-to-heart about how mean, how unfair, how abusive they're being to you. And when you try to have that heart-to-heart, they fall into this victim status, which is their way of evading the conversation and ultimately evading any accountability for their ways. Narcissists, most of them and most cluster Bs, they were victims of something in the past. They do hold a lot of hurt. They do hold a lot of resentment. They do hold a lot of anger. They hold the sense of injustice being made towards them. And they feel till this day they are a victim of society of sorts. And they can so easily just kind of fall into that persona, and they might all of a sudden bring up something that happened to them in the past, or they might blame shift onto you, and while they're abusing you and making you feel bad, all of a sudden they somehow shift it to make it seem like you're the one who's abusing them. And because narcissists have been deeply victimized in the past, that's why they're abusive today, because they didn't manage to get through the trauma of it. Because they are so victimized and they hold that feeling inside. They have this broken child inside, which they try to camouflage and not let surface too much. But that broken child is still inside them somewhere, and they let it surface from time to time. It's, they go from aggression to passive aggression, because they go from abusing you to all of a sudden making you feel bad, like you've done something wrong. And they play it so well. And it just means that, it's just one of the things they have in their defensive capabilities and their toolkit of defense mechanisms, where they don't ever have to feel bad about their ways. They don't ever have to be accountable for their ways towards others. They don't ever have to feel guilty. They don't ever have to feel remorse. They don't ever need to own up to anything bad they do to anybody. I mean, narcissists, they can drive people to panic attacks. They can drive people to long-term depression. They can drive people to suicide. They can drive people to, the worst things you can imagine, because they put you in the darkest of places. And then people in the darkest of places, they don't know how to cope, so they do things that are very unfortunate. And they just don't have any remorse for that type of thing. And it's when you realize that, you can be with a narcissist who can drive you crazy, can drive you to a mental hospital, can cause all kinds of illnesses, can even drive you to suicide. And in their mind, they haven't really done any wrong. If anything, they will further victimize themselves, how all of a sudden they're not getting their supply needs met because the person who once was there supplying them was selfish enough to take their own lives or do whatever it was. I'm just saying, narcissists, they can push you to the most extremes, and they don't know how to feel bad for it, because that's how the disorder operates. I could give personal examples of that, which I won't, but I've seen that firsthand, and it's when you want to try to make sense out of that and think, how can people do this? You don't really get a satisfying answer. It's only when you understand that these people are so messed up. It's just who they are. And, I mean, if you look at the cluster B spectrum, you have narcissists, you have borderline personality disorder, you have other forms of antisocial personality disorder. They say like 3 or 4% of the population is narcissistic, another 2 or 3%, whatever is borderline. If anywhere between like 3 and 8 or 3 and 9% of the population is on the spectrum of cluster B disorder, I mean, you're looking at close to 1 in 10 people that has one of those disorders in that spectrum. The point there is, look, there are a lot of people out there who struggle so much with their own issues, who struggle so much with their own traumas, that you can't expect them to be healthy people. And if you try to depend on people like that too much, if you try to rely on them too much, then you're putting yourself in a very unhealthy, dangerous situation. So, one of the reasons I make all these videos is really to drive home the point that once you accept that there's certain people out there that operate in a certain way, once you accept that it's normal, unfortunately, it's normal that you're going to have 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 or 1 in 30 people, whatever the statistics are, different sources say different things. Once you realize that there is a certain percentage of the population, and when you know that, the world has whatever 8 billion people, so that translates into many, many millions. So you have many, many millions, many, many, many millions of people with these disorders on the planet, and a lot of them are in your family. You work with them, you've been in relationships with them, you might live in the neighborhood with them. It just comes down to you to having your own kind of emotional maturity, your emotional independence, where you don't get taken advantage of. Because these people will, if you make most of these types of people, the cluster Bs, they can't really target you as such unless you let them. Because it's narcissists in particular, they don't force people to become their victims, because that's not how they operate. But rather, they look for people who have certain vulnerabilities, and they try to soften you up, gain your trust, to get you to become a voluntary victim, so to speak. But once you're educated in the topics, once you're educated on, the kind of people that are out there, then it becomes much more difficult for them to have their way with you. It becomes much more difficult for you to be a victim. So it's just about understanding, you might not be a narcissistic person. You might not be heavily emotionally dysregulated. However, there are a lot of people out there who are, and you cannot change them. And the moment you try to change even one of them, you're the one who's going to suffer the consequences of that. Because no one's ever managed to change these people unless they want to change. And the best you can do is understand it. Understand why you've been a victim of the past. Understand why you ignored the red flags. Understand why you let these people get too close to you. And just realize, okay, that's not what I want to do going forwards. I can do better. I don't deserve that. And I've learned my lesson. And I'm thankful for the lesson I've learned, because it's made me so much better and stronger, and it's helped me self-reflect and introspect, because I would never have managed to introspect so thoroughly, so clearly, so diligently had someone like that not try to take advantage of me. Because when somebody tries to take advantage of me and abuse me and maybe push me to the darkest of places, do I realize, okay, there's something about me that allowed that to happen. Now I understand that. Now I can work on it. Now I can live a life that's worth living, and it won't happen again. So that's the good that comes out of it. But it's up to you to use the experience and circumstance of what it can really offer you, instead of hoping for people to change and making yourself a victim, because you don't deserve that. Thanks for watching.